Throughout history, power has always worn many masks. Some wore crowns, some held guns, and in our modern world, some hide behind screens and fake identities. But today we're not talking about kings or conquerors. We're talking about a new empire of deception. One that silently grew from the shadows of economic expansion, masked behind Chinese investment projects, and eventually engulfed the hopes and savings of innocent people, including US citizens. In the early 2010s, the Chinese government began cracking down on domestic cybercrime networks that had been operating with increasing sophistication across the mainland. These operations included online fraud, telecom scams, identity theft, and digital blackmail. Faced with growing law enforcement pressure, many of these underground syndicates began to look outward beyond China's borders, seeking more lenient jurisdictions with weak regulations, poor enforcement, and easy access to vulnerable populations. Southeast Asia presented the perfect storm. Countries like Cambodia and Thailand, with their rapidly developing digital infrastructure, high levels of corruption, and desperate economic conditions in certain regions, became attractive landing zones for these criminal enterprises. These Chinese syndicates began exporting their models of deception to these neighboring nations, building secretive call centers, digital scam factories, and elaborate networks of fraud operations disguised as tech startups, casinos, or international investment firms. By 2016, these criminal groups had infiltrated key economic zones, often in plain sight. They used shell companies, front organizations, and strategic bribes to local officials to secure land, buildings, and protections. In Cambodia, the coastal city of Sihanoukville saw a dramatic transformation. Once a quiet town known for tourism and backpackers, it became ground zero for a wave of Chinese-led developments, many tied directly or indirectly to scam operations. Real estate prices boomed, casinos sprouted on every corner, and behind these glitzy facades were hidden rooms filled with traffic workers, laptops and scripts designed to lure unsuspecting victims, many of whom were American citizens, into financial ruin. The fraud wasn't limited to emails or spam calls. It evolved into complex pig butchering scams, where American victims were seduced online through fake romantic relationships and convinced over weeks or months to invest in fraudulent crypto platforms or phony financial ventures. These scams were meticulously orchestrated from buildings in Cambodia and Thailand, often by other victims, men and women from China, Malaysia, Vietnam, and even America, who had been lured by false job offers and then imprisoned in scam compounds. The criminals behind these operations used surveillance, physical torture, starvation, and threats of organ harvesting to keep their workers compliant. Thailand, though more regulated, wasn't immune. Scam operations, often run by Chinese nationals or local partners trained by them, set up in remote border regions and urban tech zones. These centers used advanced AI chatbots, cloned websites, fake US phone numbers, and social media networks to target American citizens with scams tailored specifically to their behaviors, age groups, and locations. People in the US were robbed of savings, retirement funds, or even second mortgages. Some were scammed out of thousands, others out of hundreds of thousands. Victims felt ashamed, isolated, and often received no justice. This entire wave of crime grew not just from criminal ambition, but from a calculated shift, a migration of fraud from inside China to vulnerable nations like Cambodia and Thailand. It marked a dark turning point in the globalization of cybercrime. The rise of these Chinese scam syndicates reshaped not just the criminal landscape of Southeast Asia, but altered the lives of thousands of Americans who never even saw it coming. Imagine someone waking up in America, answering a job ad that promised the chance of a lifetime, only to be flown thousands of miles away, then imprisoned in a Cambodian building surrounded by barbed wire, forced to scam other innocent people just to survive. That's not fiction. That's what really happened. As the Chinese scam industry rooted itself deeper into Southeast Asia, particularly in Cambodia and Thailand, the scale and strategy of operations evolved. What began as simple internet fraud schemes morphed into a multi-billion-dollar international racket. American citizens, especially retirees, business owners, and crypto investors, became top targets. These scammers used a mix of psychology, high technology, and patient manipulation. The most devastating tactic was the romance investment hybrid scam known as pig butchering. This long-con approach used social engineering to gain a victim's trust over weeks or even months. Victims were approached on social media, dating apps, or even through wrong number texts. The conversations began casually, built around friendship or budding romantic interest. Once emotional trust was established, the scammers would pivot to discussions about life goals and financial freedom, eventually introducing the idea of investing in exclusive crypto platforms that were entirely fake, controlled by the scammers and designed to simulate profit. The sophistication of these fake platforms was astonishing. Victims could log in, track their growth, and even withdraw small amounts of money in the beginning. This psychological bait reinforced belief in the system's legitimacy. Once hooked, victims would pour in more, tens of thousands of dollars in some cases. By the time they tried to withdraw larger sums, their accounts would be locked, customer service would vanish, and the platform would disappear or claim the funds were frozen due to security checks. Many Americans, including professionals and even tech-savvy investors, fell into these traps. The criminals behind these scams worked from buildings protected by local gangs, bribed officials, and corrupt security forces. Victims in the US tried to get help, but jurisdictions were murky, international cooperation was weak, and many cases were dismissed or never followed through. These scams weren't only financial thefts, they were psychological ambushes engineered by networks that blended crime, tech, and deception with terrifying precision. Even worse, the people running these scams were not always free. Thousands of trafficked workers from across Asia were held in digital slavery, forced to scam under threats of violence or death. Some were lured from China with job ads promising tech support or data entry work in Cambodia or Thailand. When they arrived, their passports were confiscated and they were taken to fortified compounds. They were trained to speak like Americans, use Western slang, and mimic online behaviors. Some who tried to escape were beaten, sold to other operations, or never seen again. This created an environment where US citizens were being financially destroyed by enslaved scam workers, many of whom were victims themselves. The layers of suffering were deeply entwined, making these scams not just crimes, but global humanitarian crises. The international response was slow and fragmented. American embassies issued warnings, but the scams continued. For every operation shut down, new ones emerged under different names. It was a digital war, silent, psychological, and ruthless, and American citizens were its unsuspecting victims. This isn't just about losing money, it's about losing dignity, about people who had dreams, families, and ambitions and saw them crushed by invisible hands from a foreign land. It's about manipulation so cunning, it traveled from Shanghai boardrooms to Sihanoukville casinos, draining billions from Americans who never even left their couch. As Cambodia and Thailand became the operational hubs for sophisticated scam rings, a troubling reality unfolded. These nations were not just passive hosts, but increasingly entangled in the scam ecosystem. In Cambodia, especially around Sihanoukville, massive Chinese-built compounds emerged seemingly overnight. Officially labeled as special economic zones, these complexes were often fronts for organized crime operations. Inside, illegal casinos, scam call centers, and cyber fraud hubs thrived. The Cambodian government initially welcomed the influx of Chinese investment, viewing it as a sign of progress and development. But over time, these investments turned into enclaves of lawlessness. Corruption at local and national levels allowed these operations to flourish without fear of police raids or legal accountability. For many Cambodian authorities, the money pouring in from these operations was too good to question. Bribes, land deals, and profit sharing blurred the lines between government, business, and crime. In Thailand, the scam model was slightly more discreet but just as dangerous. The country's well-established tourism infrastructure and more regulated economy meant that these operations had to adapt. Instead of massive scam compounds, they were tucked away in border towns, rented office buildings, and even high-rise condos in Bangkok. Here, they exploited digital anonymity and high-speed internet to mask their locations. Thailand's strategic position near the Golden Triangle and its proximity to Cambodia and Laos made it an ideal launchpad for transnational cybercrime. Thai immigration loopholes and underfunded cybersecurity enforcement further allowed these groups to hire traffic workers, import illegal equipment, and operate under the radar. While some Thai officials tried to intervene, others were compromised, either through fear, bribes, or complicity. Both countries, facing mounting international pressure, started making arrests and raids, but these were often cosmetic. The core networks remained untouched, adapting faster than authorities could respond. The heart of the tragedy was that ordinary citizens, both in America and in Southeast Asia, were caught in a geopolitical and criminal crossfire. On one end, American retirees, professionals, and young investors were losing life savings. On the other, Cambodian and Thai citizens, alongside trafficked Chinese, Vietnamese, and Filipino workers, were trapped in a cycle of poverty, exploitation, and criminal coercion. The Chinese scam networks used promises of employment, threats of violence, and deep corruption to keep their operations running like machines. American victims often had no clue where the scam originated or how to get justice. Many reported the crimes to the FBI or local police, only to be met with silence or bureaucratic helplessness. Meanwhile, back in Cambodia and Thailand, journalists who tried to expose these operations were threatened or silenced. NGO that rescued traffic workers operated in fear. This wasn't just a financial crime wave. It was a breakdown of international accountability, where crime crossed borders faster than justice ever could. But in every dark moment of history, there has always been a turning point. The point where silence ends, where truth begins, where victims stop being statistics and start becoming a movement. And that moment is now. The human trafficking component of these scam operations is perhaps the darkest and most overlooked aspect of the entire crisis. In both Cambodia and Thailand, thousands of individuals, primarily from China, Vietnam, the Philippines, and even African nations, have been lured under false pretenses into what they believed were legitimate tech, customer service, or administrative jobs. The reality was shockingly different. Once inside the scam compounds, these individuals had their passports confiscated, were monitored around the clock, and were subjected to forced labor, physical abuse, and mental torture. Many were beaten, electrocuted, or starved for refusing to cooperate or failing to meet scam quotas. Reports began surfacing about young men and women being sold from one compound to another like commodities, often traded across borders without their consent. These weren't just isolated incidents. They were part of a systematic network that thrived on human suffering, driven by a global demand for scams that preyed on vulnerable populations across continents. Even more chilling was the complicity or indifference of regional authorities. In many cases, rescue missions by families or humanitarian organizations were thwarted by corrupt officials who were either bribed or directly involved in the trafficking ring. Victims who managed to escape or were rescued often faced immense legal and social hurdles. Many were treated not as victims but as criminals for working in illegal operations, even though their participation was forced. The psychological trauma left behind was devastating. Survivors spoke of being locked in dark rooms for days, forced to scam elderly Americans by pretending to be family members in distress or representatives from government agencies. Some were instructed to emotionally manipulate targets using AI-generated scripts and synthetic voices. The emotional weight of being a victim and a forced perpetrator left scars that may never fully heal. Efforts from international organizations and journalists have shone a light on this harrowing issue, but progress remains slow. The deeply rooted nature of corruption, combined with the global reach of the scam industry, means that dismantling these operations requires unprecedented levels of cooperation between nations. It also demands a fundamental shift in how the world views cybercrime, not as a faceless financial issue, but as a human rights crisis. The victims of these trafficking networks are not just statistics. They are sons, daughters, mothers, and fathers whose lives were torn apart by a system that profits from deceit, violence, and the exploitation of desperation. Their voices deserve to be heard. Their stories need to be told, and justice, however delayed, must be delivered. We are the generation that must stand up, not just with caution, but with courage, not with blame, but with bold action. Let this story be a lesson, not a defeat. Let every scam expose the flaws we must fix in diplomacy and cybersecurity and awareness. While the scam industry operating in Cambodia and Thailand has roots in regional crime syndicates, its growth into a billion-dollar enterprise was made possible by intricate international networks. These operations were not just the product of local gang activity. They evolved into transnational systems that connected Chinese criminal organizations, Southeast Asian cartels, and even enablers in Europe and North America. The structure of these scams was disturbingly sophisticated, mimicking the hierarchy and strategy of multinational corporations. There were departments for recruitment, training, information technology, and even public relations. Each compound operated like a business hub, complete with quotas, scripts, performance metrics, and incentive systems. This level of organization helped shield the masterminds from direct exposure and enabled the industry to expand rapidly across borders. The scam centers moved from China to Cambodia and Thailand after crackdowns in mainland China, demonstrating how fluid and adaptive the networks became under pressure. A major facilitator of this expansion was digital anonymity and technological innovation. Cryptocurrencies, encrypted messaging apps, and online money laundering platforms gave these syndicates the tools to operate invisibly. US. Citizens were among the most lucrative targets due to their access to credit cards, bank accounts, and retirement savings. The scammers often impersonated government officials, bank representatives, or romantic partners through carefully scripted interactions and fake websites. The scams became so complex that victims were sometimes involved for months before realizing they had been duped. Some were lured into fake investment schemes, while others were manipulated emotionally in long-term romance scams. The level of data mining, identity theft, and social engineering used was not only impressive but terrifying, showing the global reach and technical sophistication of the criminal networks. Governments around the world began to take notice when the financial damage in the United States reached billions annually. But it wasn't just about the money. Investigations revealed that scam proceeds were funding other forms of organized crime, drug trafficking, arms sales, and even political corruption. The industry had become a financial engine for illicit global operations. Intelligence agencies across Asia, the US, and Europe started collaborating more closely to map these networks, but progress was slow. The scammers were always a step ahead, moving compounds across borders, rebranding their fake businesses, and exploiting legal loopholes in visa and immigration systems. Some of the biggest crackdowns came only after international pressure mounted from human rights groups and media exposés. What makes this even more disturbing is that many of these scam centers are hidden in plain sight. They operate under the guise of tech companies, call centers, or casinos. Local communities often turn a blind eye, either out of fear or because of economic dependence. In some regions, these scam operations became the largest employers, making it politically risky for local leaders to take action. As awareness grows and public pressure increases, more victims are coming forward and more countries are starting to treat this as a global cybercrime emergency. But the fight is far from over. Dismantling these international networks requires not just law enforcement, but global cooperation, cyber expertise, financial oversight, and above all, the moral will to prioritize justice over profit. We don't look back to stay stuck in the past. We look back to understand how we got here and where we must go next. The road to justice is long, but history has always favored those who fight back with knowledge, resilience, and unity. The human cost behind the Chinese scam industry in Cambodia and Thailand is perhaps the darkest and most heartbreaking aspect of this transnational crime wave. Beyond the billions of dollars lost by US citizens and others around the world lies a hidden system of slavery, coercion, and unimaginable abuse. The scam centers are often staffed not by willing employees, but by victims themselves. Young people lured from China, Vietnam, Malaysia, the Philippines, and even as far as Africa and South America with promises of legitimate jobs. Once inside these compounds, often fortified with armed guards, surveillance systems, and barbed wire, they are stripped of their passports, beaten into submission, and forced to run elaborate online frauds targeting Westerners. If they refuse, underperform, or try to escape, they face torture, starvation, or even death. Some of these workers, under the constant threat of violence, are forced to scam others as their only means of staying alive. The industry operates like a modern-day slave trade under the guise of a digital enterprise. Reports from investigative journalists, NGOs, and even survivor testimonies reveal the terrifying reality inside these compounds. Victims describe how people were sold from one gang to another like livestock, with price tags based on their skills in English coding or manipulation. Women were often subjected to sexual violence or forced into prostitution as punishment or profit. Some were locked in rooms for months, completely cut off from the outside world. The psychological trauma inflicted is immense, with many survivors experiencing severe PTSD, depression, and suicidal ideation even after escaping. These compounds, often operating under the radar of corrupt or complicit local authorities, have created a humanitarian crisis hidden beneath a layer of digital fraud. While the West focuses on the financial scams, the human rights abuses are largely ignored or minimized. International pressure has begun to build as these stories come to light. Several rescue missions have been coordinated with the help of global human rights organizations and sympathetic law enforcement officers. Survivors are increasingly speaking out, sharing their experiences and warning others. But these rescues are dangerous, slow and limited in scope. The root of the problem lies in the weak legal systems, rampant corruption, and lack of accountability in many of the regions hosting these scam factories. Bribes, threats, and political cover shield the criminal operators, making it incredibly difficult for justice to prevail. For every compound that is shut down, 2 more seem to pop up elsewhere, often better hidden and more fortified. The issue demands more than condemnation. It requires international sanctions, coordinated investigations, and support systems for the thousands of exploited victims still trapped inside. The true tragedy is that this isn't just a financial crime wave. It's a human trafficking epidemic hiding in plain sight. Until the world recognizes the dual nature of this crisis, economic fraud intertwined with modern slavery, real solutions will remain out of reach. Awareness must lead to action. Governments, tech companies, banks, and ordinary citizens must band together to expose, resist, and ultimately dismantle the machinery of pain and deception that continues to operate unchecked across borders. Only then can justice begin to reach the lives that have been shattered by this global scam empire.